Afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So 2 days after Kevin Falcon pulled the plug on BC United's election campaign, candidates and voters are now pondering where they fit in BC's political landscape. Do you feel you have a political home? We'll talk to former BC Liberal Cabinet Minister Terry Lake, and we'll take your calls. And it is a Friday before a long weekend. Perfect timing for Brian Minter to visit. Call in with your gardening questions after 12:30. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Well, there are many questions now about where voters who supported BC United will take their support and where their candidates will go as well. As you know, party leader Kevin Falcon announced the end of the BC United campaign, and he pledged his support for John Rustad and the Conservative Party of BC. Not all of his rank and file feel the same. Corinne Kirkpatrick is the BC United MLA for West Vancouver, Capilano.
Have to question the values and principles just based on how this whole thing even came about. And my big concern here is that we have just created a giant gap in the political spectrum in British Columbia, is that we no longer have a place for people like me. And for most British Columbians, I would dare say, who are really in the center.
That's Corinne Kirkpatrick, BC United MLA for West Vancouver, Capilano. Well, with just 7 weeks until the provincial election, BC United candidates are pondering their future. They may run as a Conservative, Conservative leader John Rustad and Kevin Falcon work out that final candidates list. Corinne Kirkpatrick, in that interview with the early edition this morning, said she was contemplating running as an independent. Mike Bernier has also said the same. Shirley Bond and Todd Stone will not run again. Now, this change to the electoral landscape has made things more complex for everyone, candidates and voters alike. And for some, as you heard, it means our politics may now be more polarized. Here's former BC Liberal Premier Christy Clark speaking more about this morning.
Not really very much.
Okay.
I've been a proponent of putting the coalition back together. Absolutely, because it's, since 1952, since W.A.C. Bennett, that's the only way we've been able to kind of make sure that the NDP don't wind up in power in British Columbia. But it really has always been a coalition. There's always been Conservatives and Liberals fighting each other like crazy in federal elections and then coming back to provincial elections and working together. That's what I devoted my political career to. And it worked. It worked. I thought we did a good job, and Gordon Campbell's government before me. I wonder how well it will work when there really isn't any coalition anymore. It's just, one party on the right, one party on the left, and people increasingly polarized.
Do you agree? Is BC now more polarized? Do you feel you have a political home as we inch closer to a provincial election? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can hit pound 690. Joining me to talk about this now are two former high-profile BC United or BC Liberal cabinet ministers. Mike de Jong is the current BC United MLA for Abbotsford West, a candidate for the federal Conservatives in the riding of Abbotsford South Langley. Terry Lake is the former BC Liberal MLA for Kamloops South Thompson and a former provincial health minister. Hello to you both.
Hi, Michelle.
Hello, good to be on the program. Hello, Terry.
Hey, Mike.
Two former colleagues joining there, and I will note, though, that we have some diversity here of opinion because, Mike, you are running for the federal Conservatives. Terry, you have run for the federal Liberals in the past, or sought the nomination.
I ran for the Liberal Party of Canada in 2019, and yes, Mike is a Conservative, I'm a Liberal, and as Christy said, we worked all together, and I would say 99% of the time worked very well together.
So this is representative of the discussion that we're having now. Mike, I just want to go to you first. So, you're still sitting, so what was this all like for you? What's your week been like?
Well, I made the mistake of leaving the province for 3 days near the end of August in an election year. And the political province I've come back to, of course, looks very different. I don't want to leave the impression that I had some inkling that all of this was going to happen when I departed at the beginning of the week, I didn't, but I'm not overly surprised. And I think free enterprisers across the province, the majority of them, are viewing this as a fairly positive development. But I don't think it by any means guarantees a particular result in the next provincial election that is only a few weeks away.
You said you're not surprised. There's been some criticism of how Kevin Falcon has handled all of this, from Corinne Kirkpatrick, for example. Was any of this, any of the polling, for example, for BC United, has that played a role at all in your decision to move toward federal politics?
Yeah, politicians who say they ignore polls, generally they say that more when they're not in their favor. Politicians look at polls. Now, polls aren't always accurate, but the trend over a period of time here obviously was not particularly advantageous for the BC United Party, and we've all heard the talk. We've seen the people of late who have chosen to leave the BC United Party and join the Conservative Party of British Columbia. So that trend was building, and as we got closer to the provincial election due in just over a month's time, the pressure on people like Kevin Falcon and I suppose John Rustad to try to come to terms and reform and recreate a genuine coalition of the sort that Christy Clark just described was building.
Terry, what do you think of the choices that are before BC United MLAs or their candidates now?
Well, I'm in the middle. Obviously, I've always been a centrist, and as Corinne's comments earlier today indicated, for people like us, it feels like you don't have a political home anymore, because the BC Liberal Party and BC United was a coalition. There was room for views, on the center and to the right, and we managed quite well. Now it does feel more polarized, that you either have a choice of a leftist government or what I would call a fairly right-wing party in the BC Conservatives. Now, Todd Stone yesterday at his announcement said John Rustad's challenge is to bring his party from the extreme into the mainstream, and I thought that was a really good way to encapsulate the challenge ahead of John and his team, because if they want to capture the vote of people near the center, they're going to have to become more mainstream. And so far, I don't see a lot of indication that that's happening.
Let's take some calls now. I'm happy to welcome as our panel today former BC Liberal Health Minister Terry Lake, and he also ran for the federal Liberals in 2019, and Mike de Jong, BC United MLA for Abbotsford West and a candidate now for the federal Conservatives in the riding of Abbotsford South Langley, asking you, do you feel that politics in BC just became more polarized? Do you think you have a home in the political landscape as we head toward a provincial election, October 19th? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Tasha is calling us now in Richmond. Hi, Tasha. What are your thoughts?
Hi. Thanks so much for looking at things from that very good question. I feel myself to be a centrist in many ways, but also very progressive. And I'm quite happy with the current government, and I was happy with the arrangement with the Greens that brought the NDP into power. As a former BC educator, I was pretty upset with the BC Liberal government that forced us all the way to the Supreme Court to get our contract rights back, and also to help children. There's a whole generation that lost out on the services of specialist teachers because of then Education Minister Christy Clark's actions. I predict Christy Clark is going to come back and lead a centrist party in this province. That's my prediction, and I think it's going to happen. And I find her to be quite a political opportunist, and she's getting lots of traction right now. And I want to say that I hate the polarization. I'm very upset that that's happening in BC, and there's such a stark contrast, and people are going to get nasty, and it upsets me deeply because, you know, we all need to pull together to help people in BC. That's my view.
Okay.
And then I just want to give a shout out to Terry Lake to thank you for your advocacy for seniors. All these years, especially during the pandemic and ongoingly, I really appreciate that. Seniors in my family and just anyone who's doing work to make lives better for seniors or children, I'm all about that. So watch Christy Clark. She's going to go right up the middle, and she'll be back.
You know,
she's itching to get back, and she'll be back. But it's not a good situation here, and either way, what's going on federally, the language, the name calling, the social media stuff. I mean, and Trump and all of that, Polyev.
Okay.
No, I have no use for it. Like, we got to work together. There's real problems, and we need to get a handle here and help people. Anyway, that's my view.
Thank you very much. On Christy Clark, yes, her name keeps popping up. Of course, she was on. She's been on CBC, and she was asked this morning, you know, what role did you have in all of this? And she said, not very much. And as you heard in that clip earlier, talked about how things have gotten polarized. Let me go to Mike de Jong on that. I'm guessing you want to respond to some of her comments there. Also want to ask you a little bit about John Rustad, but any thoughts about what Tasha's just said there?
Well, I don't know that we're going to achieve much by redebating what for many people is ancient history. I will say this, I'm not entirely sure that this ends up in the polarized world that people think. Look at the history of this province over the last 75, 80 years. There has been a free enterprise coalition. It has gone by the name Social Credit. That ended in the early 1990s. Some say I played a role in that when I got elected and beat Grace McCarthy. It then, that coalition reformed itself around the name BC Liberal. This seems to happen to the free enterprise movement every 30 or 35 years in this province. It doesn't necessarily have to equate with a polarization or a greater polarization. In this instance, we'll see. I suppose it might, but we'll see.
But there are those, I guess what they're concerned about is some would say, you know, those comments that some of the comments and criticisms that they've heard from the leader of the BC Conservatives, John Rustad, is going toward that farther to the right, right? The questions about climate change and questions about the SOGI 123, for example. Let me just play a clip from Todd Stone speaking on CBC yesterday.
I didn't endorse the BC Conservative Party per se. What I said in my press conference yesterday was the onus, big time, is on John Rustad, the leader, to demonstrate that he has what it takes to be premier. And job number one is to weed out of his candidate, roster, all those candidates that have got extreme views on issues that, frankly, are positions that are not shared by the vast majority of British Columbians. Most British Columbians are in that center right, center left, that center.
So, Mike, what do you think John Rustad needs to do then to make that case that the BC Conservatives is a bigger tent?
Well, the first thing he needs to do is to solidify the actual coalition that seems to have been created as a result of Kevin Falcon's decision and the BC United decision. That doesn't just happen automatically. These free enterprise coalitions, under whatever name you want to give them, take time. And the big question here is whether there is sufficient time now to do so. And it's about more than just shaking hands at a podium. You've heard and you've raised some of the issues, some of the serious policy issues. We get caught up in names. At the end of the day, it is about the policies and the approaches that leaders and political parties take, and whether or not they reflect the views of the majority of British Columbians. I happen to think that the majority of British Columbian Canadians tend to look for responsible fiscal management from their governments. We haven't seen a lot of that in this country lately, and I think this new entity, if that's the right word for it, will probably better reflect people's views with respect to fiscal responsibility in government.
Marissa is our next caller now in Delta. Hi, Marissa.
Hello.
And what are your thoughts? Are BC politics now more polarized? Do you feel you have a home politically?
Oh, absolutely. It's so much more polarized now. I feel like I've lost a party. I've always voted. Now I don't know what I'm going to do. The NDP government, they've been in power 9 years. They did not see the doctor shortage. They did not see the nursing shortages.
Since 2016, right?
Yes. So, yes.
Okay.
They've had so much time to plan, and I don't see that as a viable option. And frankly, the Conservative government, all they think about is fiscal responsibility. Society is second and third. And I truly believe that a central government holds both accountable, fiscal responsibility and society. And we've lost that.
Marissa, thanks so much for weighing in Delta. Richard is up next now in Victoria. Hi, Richard.
Yeah, hello.
What are your thoughts on the parties as they stand? Hi, Richard. Are you there?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the former Liberal Party, Christy Clark left that party in pretty good shape. They actually had one more seat, if I recall correctly, in her final election than the NDP. But due to the NDP Green team up, they lost power. After that, when the Liberal Party rejected, I'll use that word, Diane Watts as a possible leader, they just went to heck after that. I think they made a huge mistake and they floundered. And one of their big mistakes was to ignore classic conservatism and people's desires and values around that. It's a kind of, I don't know, for someone who's claiming to be a centrist, which I've heard 2 or 3 times on the show already, to then a true centrist would not label John Rustad or his whole party extremists. That's the kind of divisive and misleading language that is creating a lot of our divisiveness today.
That we've heard on from the NDP, for example.
From Mr. Lake, as well as another caller.
Would you consider some of the candidates and the posts that they have made, for example, when it comes to conspiracy theories and things like that, extremists?
I'm not someone who's going to fixate on one statement about one issue and paint a whole party with that. Okay, if I did that, I could sure paint the NDP as extremists. Look at the state of disarray that our province is in. The worst. I'm 68 years old. I've never seen this province in the kind of disarray that we're in now. As the earlier caller mentioned, she just said that, they've been in power, whatever it is, 8 years or 9 years or something. That's a significant amount of time. And every single measurable aspect of life in our province is worse. So am I advocating for John Rustad? No, I'm not. Will John Rustad or Pierre Poilievre by default become my political home temporarily? Yes, they absolutely will, unless someone like Christy Clark, who was described as a centrist but also an opportunist, which try to tell me a politician that's not an opportunist when they want power. So unless someone like a Christy Clark or a Diane Watts or someone with a real, I'll use the word classic conservatism approach comes to the forefront, then temporarily I will be part of voting for a Rustad or a Poilievre. And the other thing is, this implication that's happening also on the show today that Rustad needs to adjust his rhetoric, or else look at how he's doing in the polls, coming out of nowhere. I don't like the rhetoric, And frankly, with all due respect, Mr. Lake is using the kind of divisive language today that has got us in the place we're at.
Okay. Richard, thank you very much for your call, too. That's Richard in Victoria. I'll go to Terry Lake for a response.
Well, yeah, I certainly don't want to be divisive. This is not my intent. But I do think there is a gap. And when, for me and many like me, the biggest single threat we face today is climate change. And so it makes it very difficult to support a party whose leader does not believe in the science behind climate change and the need to take urgent action, as everyone should be across the world, to combat climate change. So to me, someone who doesn't believe in the science of climate change, that's an extreme position. Someone who supports candidates who think that the vaccine, COVID vaccine, makes you magnetic. To me, that's extreme. So it's not me saying this; it's their own candidates and their own leader saying these things. So I don't want to be divisive, not at all. And so I encourage everyone to find out about their individual candidates and their ridings, and press them on these issues. And, you're going to have to make a decision about who the very best individual, regardless of party, to represent you in Victoria.
Just one last question here, perhaps quickly to both of you. I'll go to you, Terry, first, because you're watching now this from a little bit of a distance. What do you make of where the BC Liberal Party has gone?
Well, I'm quite devastated, really. I didn't vote for the name change, and I think that was one of the fatal flaws. The first leadership was maybe the beginning of that. But when Mike says a name doesn't matter, it actually does, because most people aren't paying attention to the policies until the very end, perhaps. Most people just associate the name with a sense of who that party is in their head without knowing a lot about it. So the name actually matters. So when you ask people who they're supporting, if they support the NDP, they're going to say the NDP. If they don't like the NDP and you say Conservative, they're going to say Conservative, because they had no idea what the BC United Party was. If BC Liberal had been the choice, I suspect those polls would have been quite different.
And Mike, to you, what are your thoughts? You've been with a party for so long. What do you think now of where it's gone and ended up?
A guy like me, and to a certain extent, Terry, you can't help but be nostalgic. I ran 8 times, was elected 8 times under a particular party banner, and was proud to do so. I have learned over 30 plus years that there's not always a lot of room for nostalgia in politics, and the people that made the decisions, and in this case, Kevin Falcon was very much at the forefront of the decision to change the name of his party, will now be held and have been held accountable, and people have reflected on that, and the results speak for themselves. It is a big change that has taken place. I agree 200%, 300% with Terry. In the weeks ahead, the one thing we need people to do is become involved, become engaged, become familiar with the candidates, whatever party they're running for, and the views they represent and the policies they represent. And for heaven's sakes, we can start saying it now, in the next provincial election, get out there and vote. Because if there's a trend that is really worrisome in this country and this province, it is the declining participation in the electoral process.
Really good to have you both for this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Terry. Good to see you both.
Take care. Mike de Jong is the current BC United MLA for Abbotsford West, a candidate for the federal Conservatives in the riding of Abbotsford South Langley. Terry Lake is the former BC Liberal MLA for Kamloops South Thompson, former provincial health minister. It's 12:30 now. And this is BC Today here on CBC. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Michelle Elliott. What a week it has been, right? Lots of coverage of the BC political news, of course, throughout the day here on CBC. But coming up in our next half hour, someone who stays close to his roots, Brian Minter, will be with us, and he'll take your questions about all things gardening. He'll talk about fall bulbs as well. That's coming up after the CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The BC Coroner Service says 192 people died in BC last month after taking toxic drugs. The number of deaths is down 15% from the same month in 2023. More than 1,300 people have suffered fatal overdoses so far this year. BC Premier David Eby is ordering a review of a program that dispenses free drug paraphernalia and testing kits from hospital vending machines on Vancouver Island. The machines offer free access to naloxone, drug testing strips, and safe sex kits, but also to drug paraphernalia like bubble pipes and snorting utensils. The review comes after a Conservative candidate posted a video to social media highlighting some of her concerns. And the Vancouver Art Gallery is decreasing construction activity at the site of its planned new home after projected costs spiked to $600 million. Gallery officials say the design of the new downtown facility will have to be changed to address the 50% cost increase. And now the forecast on the North Coast. Rain this afternoon with a high of 15. Highs reaching 20 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, some sun and cloud with a high of 21. Highs from 24 to 29 degrees with sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, sunny with a high of 29 as well. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, warm and sunny this afternoon with highs up to 27 inland. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you, Rob.
You're welcome.
You have a great weekend.
Thank you.
As Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. This is BC Today. We're live on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming as well. You can watch us on YouTube. Just search for CBC Vancouver. And this time of every 2 weeks, we have the pleasure of welcoming our gardening columnist, Brian Minter. And you can call in with your questions, and he always has an answer for you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. Or you can email your questions to bctoday@cbc.ca. And Brian Minter joins me now from Country Garden Limited in Chilliwack. Hello, Brian. Nice to see you.
Oh, my goodness, Michelle. It's great to be here. Wonderful day, wonderful weekend coming up.
Absolutely.
And for anybody who's growing a few late vegetables, that we always talk about the winter vegetables being so important, we need this weather right now because this week the evenings have become quite cold, with that wet weather. It seems like we jumped into fall already. And so actually, this is perfect weather to get things back on track. But what I really would love to talk about today, it is the only time of the year where you can plant bulbs that will show up every season of the coming year ahead. And it's just great. Now, the autumn blooming crocus are the most, it's the biggest anomaly we have. And there's over 50 to 60 species of the giant colchicum, which are hardy pretty much right across the country and across the province. But the colchicums are kind of a different bulb. I'll just show you a picture right here.
Oh, beautiful.
They come up with no leaves. The leaves, ironically, show up in April. You figure, what the dickens is showing up in my garden? So they stay for about 6 weeks and then they die down. I said, well, what just happened? It's the colchicums multiplying in your garden. And we have a few people in our neighborhood who have hundreds of them planted. And they're absolutely exquisite this time of year. But the one and they come in a beautiful double and they come in white as well, which is really nice to see. But the one that everybody knows is this one right here. That's Crocus sativus. It's a fall bloomer as well. Sativus, by the way, is where you get the spice saffron, and which is again, it's probably the most expensive spices.
And that's the yellow stem in the middle.
That orange stem in the center. They're called stigmas in the center.
Right. Yes,
that's right. And it only takes 4,000 flowers with the stigmas in them to make 1 ounce of saffron.
Wow.
So if you're thinking of making saffron, you better buy a lot of saffron crocus.
And get ready to pull and use those hands.
Exactly. But and there's a lot of bulbs. There's Steinbergia lutea, which is yellow. There's a lot of fall blooming crocus. But the irony is, you plant them now, and they bloom in about a month. And they do that year after year, and they expand and they multiply beautifully in your garden to give you unexpected. In September, all of a sudden, this color comes all over your garden, which you weren't expecting, which is so nice. And at this time of year, too, right across the province, many garden stores now have their snowdrops in, and you know that they actually start blooming in January, February, depending on the type of year we have. The yellow winter aconites, or you could plant now and have them come up right around this snowdrop time. And I can never, and I love this one. I planted some in a background area. There's an earliest daffodil to bloom. It's called Reinveld's Early Sensation. And I know the Vancouver Parks were bragging about this because in January, late January one year, right near Stanley Park, they had all the daffodils in bloom. And that's kind of a cool thing to be able to enjoy and have fun with. And then we start with so many other bulbs. And the daffodil family will actually from January, February, right through until the end of May, has a series of a sequence of bulbs to bloom. And then, of course, the tulips, the botanical tulips start very, very early. And the peony flowered tulips that go right to the end of May are nice to be able to enjoy. So strategically, all the bulbs that we think and look about, you really, if you dig a little bit deeper in terms of getting all the varieties of bulbs, you can have bulb color 12 months a year, which is really quite fun and different. And that's such a nice thing too. And by the way, the big thing is you put them in your garden, enjoy them, and leave them to multiply. I like putting them around other trees and shrubs as an underplanting, or even around small trees, so you get this combination effect, which is great. And all they need is basically, and the lawn. We don't forget that there's a lot of smaller lawns. You have no place to plant bulbs. Well, snowdrops and crocus are fabulous in lawns. In the spring, they came up with a beautiful green background, and then they, of course, fade down and they disappear just in time to start mowing your lawn. So it's a really nice thing. And I think a lot of folks, we think, when bulbs are here, I'm going to plant daffodils and tulips. There's so much more, and many different times a year you can enjoy them, which is kind of a cool thing. So a little bit of nudge for everyone. If you want to have kind of that sequence of color throughout the year, you could do that. You really can.
What a way to brighten up those gray winter days. Brian Minter is with me, our gardening columnist here on BC Today, just in time for a beautiful long weekend for you to be able to plant and garden. And he's taking your questions as well. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Lynette is calling us now from Fort Nelson. Hi, Lynette. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I have, Brian, a lush, beautiful Anthurium. I've had it probably 6, 7, 8 years. It's about 3 feet tall, but it's falling over. It's got like 13 or 14 blooms on it, and it's doing really well, but I think it needs a bigger pot, and I'm afraid to repot it. I don't want to kill it.
Yeah, and Lynette, really, there's a lady who brought one in to me the other day, which was 4 feet high, and and she staked it up, and it looked like it. This whole thing is, we're seeing more stakes and ties than we are planned. What I suggested to her, let's just cut it back and let the flowers develop. But we're finished the growing cycle in about a month or 6 weeks in the Northern Hemisphere. Even inside our homes, things are going to start to slow down a wee bit. But I would be inclined to simply cut it back because you've got a good root system. And again, knock it out of the pot. And Lynette, you bring up a very good point. I think we're done repotting tropical plants because they need to be root bound now going into late September, October. And if you think you can put it in a slightly larger pot and get it root bound before we get into the more difficult growing times for indoor plants, good for you. But I would be inclined either leave it the way it is and then wait until April when we start the growing cycle again, longer days, and you'll find that if I just cut it right back, and think I shouldn't be doing this, I'm going to wreck the plant. You're not. Maybe 4 to 6 inches above the top of the root system, it'll redevelop a new set of leaves and start coming back again. Because right now, all it's going to do is get bigger and a little bit unsightly in terms of the look of the plant. So let the blossoms finish, carry it through the winter. First thing in the spring, or as we get into late spring, let's cut it back, Lynette.
There you go, Lynette. Thank you very much. I'm glad you found sort of, narrow down from the options that were before you. It sounds like you were quite worried about what to do and harming your plant. Thank you for the call, Lynette, in Fort Nelson. Our number again is 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 to get your question in for Brian Minter. Eric is next now, and let's go to Lytton. Hi, Eric.
Hello.
Hello, how are you doing? And are you resettling back in Lytton?
Yeah, well, our house is being built right now, and I got a question about. I'm looking for a fast-growing shade tree. I see some up in the mountains that have white bark and they have kind of round, shimmering leaves in the wind. I'm looking for something like that. I really like those ones.
Eric, you're a person after my own heart because it's the poplar tree, but it's the tremula series, which are all the true, the ones that have the shimmering leaves on them, and they're absolutely great. And some are quite wide, but I love the more narrow ones, and I love planting them in groupings. And they're called the aspen, the whole aspen family. But I couldn't agree with you more. And I think once you get into a little bit more, especially where you are, I would say September, October would be the time I'd think about planting them so they can get established over the winter. But look at the narrow form. They're a Swedish version called Tremula erecta, and Eric, they just have such a beautiful shape. And you're right, every time you get a breeze, you get that shimmering of leaf, beautiful fall color. And I like the pale gray bark. It looks so nice in wintertime as well. So, and they're fast growing, really, really fast growing. So I think that's a great choice, Eric.
How do you spell that name?
Oh, tremula, it's populus, which is the family, but tremula, as in tremula, going to the Latin, Tremula, and then erecta, Erecta. Tremula erecta means very narrow columnar poplar, and I just love those trees. And most our garden places have them because they're just such popular trees today. You bet. No pun intended. Yeah.
Very popular trees.
They are. Yeah.
Brian, that's great. I mean, you've just painted such an idyllic picture for me as well. I can imagine these grouped together, these tall, narrow, shade trees. Eric, good luck to you. All the best as you resettle and move back into your new home in Lytton. Anne-Marie is our next caller now in Vancouver. Hi, Anne-Marie.
Hello, can you hear me?
We sure can. Go ahead with your question for Brian.
Yeah, hi, Brian. I phoned you before about a problem we're having in our what used to be a beautiful backyard with root weevil. And you gave me some advice about trying to shake them off in the evening onto a bit of paper and stuff. And we've put nematodes down. We actually had a whole section of the yard dug out to try and get rid of them. And we cannot get rid of them. We're sort of desperate. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for last resort tactics to get rid of these things, because they're just ruining our garden.
And what types of plants specifically? Like normally they would get on the rhododendron leaves, chew the rhodo leaves, and other broadleaf evergreens. Are those the ones you're having trouble with?
Yeah, our rhodo and also peonies. They love peonies.
Really?
And,
okay.
They're chewing our roses up.
Yeah.
And we've got like 50-year-old peonies that are just being destroyed by them.
Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. You know, we don't have, we used to have Sevin, SEVIN, as a liquid that would be put for grubs and so on, which would really take care of them quite effective because they're in the soil and they generally climb up at night. The other strategy was things like rhododendrons is simply putting sticky tape around so they won't get up the stems, and crawl up there and chew the foliage. Those were the two traditional ones. But I wonder, and we're just not having much success with nematodes these days in terms of grub control. We talked about that a few weeks ago in terms of coming up to the season where in our lawns you're going to have lots of grubs settling in. And we switched over to BTK. And BTK, but I think it's one of the companies that has a grub, a fall grub control. And I wonder if you might want to take a look at that particular product. I believe it's a Scott's product, grub control, but it's BTK. It's very organic. Let's see if we can't get more success with the BTK than we can with nematodes. And I think I would certainly give that a try and let me know how you make out. And the peonies, there's not much we can do about, of course, because the stem, you can't obviously put sticky tape on the stems of peonies. Certainly on your broadleaf plants, get some sticky material on them so they can't crawl up and do that damage. And maybe even with the peonies, tie them together very tightly. It doesn't matter this time of year because the leaves are going to go brown shortly anyway. And tie them up tightly and put some bands around them that are sticky. So anyway, deterring them you can right now. But let's try this grub out with BTK in the fall, and because they'll stay in the soil and work over the wintertime. Anne-Marie, I think that is the best hope we have from what we have available this time of year in British Columbia.
Okay, Anne-Marie, thank you very much. And I'm sorry about what you're having to deal with these weevils. I just want to acknowledge too, I think, Brian, you're at your store. You're at Country Garden Limited, so I think we can hear some of the store background, I believe, that's happening around you. No worries at all, Brian. You're fine. But just want to acknowledge for listeners who are joining us that may be what you're hearing in the background there, some of that background noise. Let's go to our next caller now. Kelly is up next in Maple Ridge. Hi, Kelly. What's your question for our gardening columnist, Brian Mincher?
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Hi, Brian. I was listening, but I just missed the first part of which bulb or flower to plant right now that will bloom in a month.
Yeah, they're called the autumn crocus or colchicum. It's a C-O-L-C-H, a colchicum, but also other varieties, the saffron crocus, if you want to be able to grow your own saffron, if you have lots of them, crocus, and crocus speciosa. They're actually, which we don't know about, they're only available this time of year as a bulb because almost immediately, even as dry bulbs, they try to shoot up and so on. So you want to get them quickly, get them in the ground quickly, well-drained soil, and you will still enjoy them. But the thing is, once you get them in and get them established, year after year, they get bigger and better very, very quickly, Kelly. And that's why, but you got to act quick because they disappear out of garden places really soon. So if you can, sooner better. Okay?
Okay, all right. The other thing I wanted to ask you, what is a good white, I have a little green and white garden, and what is a good white perennial for me to put in? I'm having trouble keeping the white flowers in the green and white garden.
Ah.
Oh, yeah, that sounds wonderful. And by the way, at this time of year, one of the absolutely key plants are the Japanese anemones. They're just starting to bloom right now. They'll continue well into the fall. And Honoraire Jobert is one of the absolute best pure white Japanese anemones. But not only that, you're getting a lot of the Veronicas that are in bloom this time of year. They bloom twice, but the new Veronicas coming out of Europe are spectacular in terms of white. And there's new salvias coming out. The Skyward series from Darwin Plants in Holland. The Skyward plant, actually salvia, blooms and reblooms white going into the fall months, which is great right now. And, we're talking about the autumn crocus. There are white autumn crocus as well, a single and double. So you'll get that surprise coming up. So there are actually a fair number of things that are white that do bloom up. The salvias, the Veronicas, and the Japanese anemones will give you fresh, new, vibrant white color at this time of year, Kelly.
I love that. Thinking about the color coordination, the rainbow of colors. Well, I guess white wouldn't be on there, but thinking about green, yeah. But I'm looking at a picture right now of that Japanese anemone. So beautiful, just very light and bright, very cheerful, I would say.
They are, and Honoraire Jobert is, in my opinion, one of the very best whites that will help Kelly out in her white and green garden.
There you go, Kelly. Thank you very much. Good luck with that color scheme of yours, white and green. Linda is next in North Vancouver. Hi, Linda.
Hello, how are you?
Very well. Thanks for calling in. And what's your question for Brian?
Well, I have an old peony plant, and there's about 6 or 7 plants in one massive pot. And they belong to my grandmother and then mother. and they've always been in a pot, and we've just sort of transplanted them every once in a while. This year I had no blooms, but lots of beautiful, rich-looking green. And I'd actually like to take them out and plant them in my daughter's garden in Winnipeg. I don't know if that's possible, or are they at the end of their life?
Oh no, they're going to go on forever. They'll outlive us with no problem at all. So, and of course they're very
as well as beauty,
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one is they're very hardy in Winnipeg, so no problem at all in terms of being able to transfer them over there. And depending on how severe cold they get, I would still think I would plant them in the fall. I would mulch over top. If you can get back to her this fall and get them planted, that'd be great. FedEx summer, what do you have to do to get back there? Drive back. But the other thing is, remember, and they should be divided, but when the leaves start to go brown and they start to die down, peonies can be lifted earlier than other roots and so on divisions and divided, but don't divide them too small. Maybe, Linda, divide them in half and then divide them in half again. That should give you enough to be able to make sure that the plant is going to be okay. Now, the blooming situation, two things here. Number one is they don't like rich soil. They want a very just average soil that's very well drained. If you give them a lot of nutrient, they tend to grow vegetatively, but they don't flower. So that's the other thing. And some nutrient, something like a 10, 15, 19, low nitrogen, the last two numbers high, will when the leaves are out, that'll help build up next year's flower. And so other than that, they're hardy, easy to divide, great time to plant them, even in Winnipeg at this time of year. And again, a well-drained soil that's not too rich would be the best to keep these alive and in your family for many years to come.
Oh, the delight in Linda's voice when you told her the news. They will last. Thanks for the call, Linda. Let's get to a couple of email questions here. These are sort of late summer, do I still have time, Brian, kinds of questions. Joanne writes, we're in the Comox Valley. We have lots of tomatoes, but they've been green for weeks and not turning red at all. What do you think's the reason?
I think the weather, and again, remember locating your tomatoes because they're heat lovers. They need as much as possible. Put them in the spot in your garden where they're going to get this late heat. We're going to get up in the Eastern Valley up to 30 degrees over the next few days here. And so that's really good. Remember, the other thing, too, is the tomatoes ripen from the inside out. So you could even pick them a little bit green. And but we still got really a month. September is usually pretty good, especially in Comox. You've got time, so not to panic just yet. And the nutrient, I always love a fish fertilizer that's liquid. I always recommend the More Bloom 0-10-10, or it's something that to get not nitrogen, but the last two numbers of phosphorus and potash that in fact will put more energy to simply maturing the existing fruits. And so that's the other thing I would do. So a liquid, low nitrogen, high phosphorus fertilizer, and again, just keep them growing. We still have lots of time, and I think if you have to pick them a little bit green, we used to pick them and put them in a basement on newspaper in a dark basement. They always ripen beautifully. So you've got lots of time yet.
There you go. Joanne, thank you. And Grace writes as well, my peach tree is very ill with blight. Only 24 peaches this year that are deformed like the leaves. So is there hope, or should I cut it down?
Yeah, absolutely not. No, we had a rain at a bit of an awkward time this year, the May-June period where the peaches were forming. And that's why we always like to do summer pruning on peaches and nectarines, essentially thin them out a little bit, more air, more light getting in. And again, depending on if we're not in the Okanagan, and the wonderful growing areas where you get the heat, if you're in a coastal region where we get the rain, you need to either have them up against the south or west side of a building, or as I did, build a canopy over top to keep the water off the leaves. And it's not really blight. It just, they get so many, diseases on, like a leaf blotch fungus type of thing, and on the peaches, the leaf curl fungus. So getting water off them, keeping off the leaves during the growing season is fine. Opening it up to get more sunlight. And again, like the tomatoes, they should be in the spot in your garden where they get absolute optimum summer heat and light. So those are a couple of things that really will help.
All right, let's go back to our callers. Terry is joining us from Kamloops. Hi, Terry.
It's Gary, but that's cool.
No, it's not cool. Gary, my apologies.
It's fine.
Hey, Brian, we were just in Holland, and we fell in love with the pleached trees, and we plan on getting rid of our cedars to fireproof our house and replace them with pleaching trees. And we're just wondering, in Kamloops, with the heat and the temperature and the extreme weather fluctuations, which tree would you recommend to pleach?
Yeah, and you're right. About 10 years ago, that whole thing started, and I laugh about this because then I was in the Essen show in Germany, where a lot of the Dutch growers, they had a pleach tree on it and a 10-foot stem. So if you wanted privacy in your backyard, you can get a 15-foot pleach tree that gives you privacy from
This
the
is a
neighbors. But
pleached tree, not a peach
yeah,
tree.
Yeah, pleached, yes,
Okay.
where they actually espalier the trees in a different way. I love, and you have to find a tree that will do this. I mean, they're normally using the liriodendron. It is one of them. Anything that grows really quickly, so they can do this. I was in a garden place in Germany in January too. They had pleached trees running almost half a mile in terms of being able to do this. And they were, but anyway, I would look at the Acer rubrums being hardy and Kamloops, but also be getting that red fall color. But the Acer rubrums, and you want to make sure they're branched, so taking out the center of a tree once they get going to get more sideways and training your branches to go sideways, because you want hardiness and you want fast growing. And that's why I love the Acer rubrums, and not the narrow forms, but I would look at, the autumn blaze. There's so many, sunset is another great variety of them. But the Acer rubrums and Kamloops would be a great one that are fast growing and hardy, but also the bigger thing now becoming drought and heat tolerant in the summertime. So that would be my favorite. And there's also poplar trees, and we talked to Eric a little while ago. They grow very, very quickly. You can be trained to do that. A little more work with them because they grow so fast, but it would be, kind of fun to be able to do that. So great idea. I love your idea. And I think, but if you don't want them too high, maybe look at some other lower types of growing trees, even some of the shrubs you could train in that particular way. There's lots of hardy flowering shrubs. Everything from the hardy forsythia to get your color in the spring, and then the espalier. Some of the hydrangeas you could train, especially the PG types, to be able to do that. Mock orange, another one that would be good. So there's lots of flowering shrubs depending on the height you want to go. But if you want to get a little bit higher and more creative, I'm going to say at the Acer rubrums would probably be the best suggestion. Gary, that would be great.
Gary, thank you very much. Sounds like you had a really good trip and you want to bring some of that back to Kamloops, some of Holland back to Kamloops. Thanks for the call, Gary. And Brian, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much. Have a great long weekend.
Oh, you too, and to all our listeners out there. And don't forget, it's a great time to plant bulbs right now. They make such a difference in your garden. And thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.